dear friend, Daryl Mott.
Wah.
But you know
That
what?
was him talking.
That,
Wah.
but we're here. We kind of upgraded.
Maybe.
So we are here with Landon Cassill.
I wouldn't say that. You didn't upgrade.
Our listeners would
They
think
would
so.
agree.
They would agree. So welcome to Sunday Money.
Presented by O'Reilly Auto Parts
Yeah, like
and Hercules Tires.
our clutch coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet. I see the read.
Yeah.
I see it. But it's early Monday morning. We raced yesterday at New Hampshire.
How early is it right now, Corey?
Actually, it's not that early. It's 11:30.
Well,
But
we were supposed to do this at 9:30.
yeah, and then I had a dentist appointment.
Yeah.
So-
I woke up. I woke my baby up early so that I could get dressed to be
So
here by 9:30.
and if Lan listens to this, she's gonna know that I'm the worst when it comes to like double booking things or just not being organized whatsoever. So this morning was a perfect example of
You talked about being disorganized.
yesterday because Daryl said he wasn't gonna be on the show last week or this coming week, and we're looking for. Let me just cover the mask. We're for our listeners here. For our listeners, we all
You need to like fold it up at the top.
yeah. So
There you go.
we have to wear masks because last week we did Lauren and I in the studio and Daryl on the screen in the back. Per protocol from NASCAR and MRN, if we have 3 people in the booth at the same time, we have to wear masks. So everybody knows that wears a mask anymore. The more you talk, the more it slides down your nose. And I wore one of those like bandana things. My 2 co-hosts here were smart, and they wore the ones that attach to your ears. And I'm having some issues here. But Landon, glad you filled in. You're picking up the slack for our dear friend Daryl Mott. We were curious before the show started on how Daryl's drywall hanging went. Laura and I both don't think that Daryl actually hung drywall.
I told him pick or it didn't happen, and then I never got picked. So
It never happened.
I'm just assuming.
Well, hopefully Daryl's enjoying a week off.
Yeah.
Where is he actually?
In the woods, I think, in Georgia.
That's all right.
In a log cabin
Yeah, that's what he says. I think he's probably out raging or something.
that he built with his bare hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Landon, it was a coincidence. Yesterday morning, we were picking up breakfast to go, by the way, because there was some very strict stipulations in New Hampshire.
Mhm.
They were lenient enough to let all the NASCAR community come in and race and then leave and not have to do the quarantine stuff. There was a letter from the senator and the whole bit. So NASCAR and Steve Phelps actually ironed out all those protocols. But we weren't allowed to go eat in a restaurant. We were only allowed to pick up food to go. So we happened to be in downtown Concord when I landed. I drove to get some coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and you happened to be there as well.
That's right.
Now, I found it interesting because you don't see Landon Cassill, or the fans at least don't hear much about Landon Cassill at the racetrack anymore. So what are you doing in New Hampshire or even any other week at the racetrack?
I've been a reserve driver for JTG with the new, I say new, but with all the COVID protocols and the screening that the drivers have to go through every race weekend. NASCAR's, taking that pretty seriously, and I don't think if a driver doesn't pass screening, they're not going to let him race. And so NASCAR advised all the teams to have a reserve driver. So Ernie Cope over at JTG gave me a call right off the bat and said, "Hey, can we fly you to the races?" So I went to the shop and fitted myself in both of their seats for Ryan Preece and Ricky Stenhouse, and I'm set to go. Take my stuff with me every week.
That's interesting though. I feel like the fans don't know because we saw that with the case with Jimmy Johnson, and Allgaier was filling in. Well, he was essentially Hendrick's reserve driver, right? He goes. You don't know that they're there, right? Landon, you've been going to every race since Darlington, right?
That's right.
Like you fly up with them on Saturday, you stay at the hotel, and you are waiting in the wings if Ricky Stenhouse or Ryan Preece ticks the beaker a little bit too toasty.
And I would say, I would imagine that it's probably more likely if I'm going to drive, it's probably more likely that I would know maybe a day in advance, that if one of them is actually sick and has to take a test, Seems like everybody's been pretty healthy, fortunately. And even if somebody was um, running a fever or had a hot temperature check at the screening, I think there's another step to that process where
Yeah.
they would, validate your health before you drove. Haven't gotten any calls on Monday or on race day morning saying, hey, he's not feeling too good or anything like that. I've
Right.
also been doing the same thing for GMS on the truck side. So they have 5 trucks. So
Odds are.
odds are at some point somebody might have something. So same thing. It's kind of an interesting process. I've never fitted in a lot of race cars in my career, but having to go to the shop and sit in each truck, talk to each crew chief, ask about like just how their whole truck, how everything is kind of set up driver wise. I've got inserts that I own. Some drivers I could fit right in their seat, some drivers I don't. So we, basically fitted up every seat, took notes, wrote everything down, and then each individual team has basically a backup plan in case I had to drive on a moment's notice.
It's funny how like the phrase fitting a driver into a car isn't like it was back in like even the early 2000s, right? There's like now there's 7-point belts that you have to fit up. They're all sewn to length. Like there's not much adjustability
Right.
for a guy like me. Like you couldn't pop in my seat,
Mm-hmm.
and we're similar size, so maybe so. But for example, like the wheels are in different spots, and you can't just slide the wheel back anymore. There's
Right.
different strengthening bars and stuff, so the steering columns don't
Everything's just so
move.
much more custom.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
in like Ricky's seat, I can I can drive Ricky's car exactly how he drives it. So literally no alterations at all whatsoever. He hops out, I can hop in. Ryan Preece, on the other hand, who's similar size to me, height-wise and everything, he's a little bit bigger than I am, so the seat is a little bit looser. But he has a weird seating position, and I think we have different like torso and leg lengths. So it's actually kind of hard for me to reach the pedals in his car. So we have to like adjust my seating position in his seat because the seat sits really upright. It gets his hips really far back. So it's kind of everybody has their ways of sitting.
yeah, and to get that particular position, there's a process called like pouring an insert. So it's this 2-part foam because you don't actually physically move the seat. The seat's built large. It's like essentially a big tub.
Yep.
And you pour this bag in there, and then Landon would sit in this bag. They pour this 2-part foam, and it grows and swells and fills every crevice of your body. If you've
Every
got
crevice.
every crevice. If you're not wearing pants, it's going to go in areas that you don't want it to go.
Right.
But that's why it is, to your point, super custom, and it's not like, unless it's Ricky Stenhouse, somebody similar size, you can't just plop in and plop out because there's so many standards of safety NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to look. David Green's going to be, if you happen to jump in that thing.
Well, and if you sat through any NASCAR safety video and watched the testing that NASCAR has done, every year the drivers sit through a safety, what do you call it, a safety meeting
seminar. Yeah.
If you've ever paid attention to any of those, you'd probably go back and look at the way that you've sat in cars and been like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, you say that because the videos they show in extreme slow frames per second, your body moves like a right front hit. If you blow a right front, like your hit last year at Indy. Did you ever see the black box footage of that?
No, the camera didn't work for it, but
yeah, because you probably
like
hit the wall so damn hard it stopped working.
Like 35 Gs or something like that.
God, so in a wreck like that, your body's moving somewhere between probably 8 to 10 inches out of the seat. Those belts are physically stretching like a rubber band.
Yep.
And your head's like smushing into the headrest in ways that you would never expect it to if you're just sitting there stationary. So yeah, when you're fitting the belts, there's not a whole lot of like, it'll work. Like,
needs to be right.
That sucker better be right, because when you blow a right front, knock on wood, your body does some weird stuff when there's 35 G's involved, or however many G's are involved in a big crash.
Corey, who's your reserve driver?
I think Landon is.
Yep.
I think Landon probably only gets paid from JTG as a reserve driver, but he's probably the reserve driver for the whole garage.
Right.
Because I would imagine, I'm guessing, Allgaier's a reserve driver for Hendrick, but beyond that, maybe Austin Cindric's the reserve driver for Penske. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the bigger. I mean, obviously JTG is a pretty well buttoned up organization and thought ahead quite a bit. I'm sure some of the smaller organizations, if they were in that position the night before, they'd be scrambling. But
yeah,
if they called me, then it would be something like, hey, I could do it, but I need to wait until Ricky and Ryan pass screening,
pass inspection.
Yeah, because that's who I'm there for.
Now, there's still a decent chance because it's going to be like this through Homestead, or I guess Phoenix. Yeah. So, are you worried that with no practice, if you were to hop in something, when's the last time you raced? Homestead?
Cup car, yeah. I mean, I ran a couple Xfinity races earlier this year for Morgan. So the last really meaningful time that I was in the car was at Phoenix.
So, and it's kind of like riding a bike, right? You'd knock the rust off and you get in there and go. But like,
I hope so. I mean, I saw Kaz Gralla, hopped in a RCR Xfinity car at Kansas. He did a great job.
Yeah.
And he hadn't been in a car in a year. And that he didn't just miss out on COVID driving, but he missed out on, the second half of last year and the first half of this year. He did a fantastic job. So,
yeah.
That was kind of encouraging to me, and especially Kaz has been at it at this level for a couple years. I've been driving these types of cars for a long time. So,
I mean, how long have you been doing it?
Long time.
So, I mean,
the first time I drove a car was a COT car. It was the first COT car to come out of the 24 shop. So I drove one of Jeff Gordon's COT cars before he ever drove it.
Tested it.
Where
at like Gresham or a place like that?
Greenville, and then we took it to Lakeland, and then Lakeland was where he drove it for the first time. That was in 2007.
You probably weren't even close to wide open at Greenville Pickens in a Cup car.
No, I mean,
that place is like racing on sandpaper.
Yeah, that was like a systems test.
Just to make sure like it turned left and the brakes actually stopped.
Yeah, that was in 2007.
That could not. I mean, how old were you?
17.
Yeah. So now, I don't even know where I was going to say something, but I forgot. Sorry. Do you have anything, Lauren?
I don't know.
My brain is not.
We were talking about how long he's been racing.
Long time. Made my first Cup start in 2010.
So we're 10 years in now.
Easily.
Are you trying to position yourself to get back into the Cup Series? Like, I think our listeners on the show are fans of yours. People on Reddit love you. People everywhere love you.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird time, and everybody's really seeing it on social media right now. It's a weird time in free agency to be a Cup driver, because Brad Keselowski had some comments, which and Brad's actually had some pretty hot takes the last couple weeks that I've agreed with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about drivers coming in and buying your rides, which Brad Keselowski doesn't have to worry about somebody coming to buy his ride. Like, the rides that he has available and the resume that he has and continues to keep building, like, he's the best free agent on the market. So if a guy like him is having a trouble trying to negotiate a good deal, what he seems fair, how much harder is it for a guy like myself or Landon to land in a position that's worth doing, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I disagree with you a little bit on the comment on Brad, because I think he might be a little bit farther removed from the direct threat of a ride buyer taking his ride because of his credentials. But, he's definitely at threat of, his market value being diminished because of drivers, maybe not even for the specific ride that he's going after, but rides that are one or two notches just below his ride that are getting, they're getting drivers in those rides that might be, 50% because of sponsorship and 50% because of driver ability, where, the team did not have that sponsorship if it weren't for the driver. Maybe it's still a qualified driver. It might have been a driver that won Xfinity races, but that driver still leveraged the sponsorship to get the ride.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the way that, Brad's business model, which is a pure professional race car driver business model. I don't bring a sponsor to a team.
Right.
You have the sponsor and you hire me.
Yeah.
He's definitely at risk of drivers at least, driving his market value down because of his comments, where you have a driver that's literally paying to drive a car and then taking their salary out of that.
Yeah.
As than a team that's paying him. So I can actually, I never really thought of it from Brad's perspective, but to hear him say that was like, you know what, I think he's right,
Yeah.
I appreciate his comments at the start of it. I was just like, look, I don't think anybody needs to hear me complain about my salary.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's fair, but it's still, it's all business, right? And this is, I think that salary might be one way that our industry sort of values the talent, and if driver salaries are continue to plummet, and the driver talent is not really valued in terms of the on-track product, then
Yeah.
the personalities are gonna go away, and
I agree.
the content is gonna get worse,
Yeah.
and the on-track product is gonna get worse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Long,
it's just
the long game.
the long game. It'll just be less engaging. So,
Yeah.
these guys are they're not just talented race car drivers; they're entertainers, and they should be paid what they're worth for sure.
And I agree with that. And I think that that's an issue in the spider web entanglement of like this driver approval conversation.
Also, shout out to any car owner that's listening to this conversation and just chuckling at two drivers sitting and talking to each other about driver salaries. They're probably thinking, listen to these two clowns.
that's what we're doing. That's what we do every week. Now you just joined because they probably listen and think I'm a clown every week, but that's part of it. I mean, but like, I feel like that stuff's not talked about. Like there are there are factors that go into free agency, and money is a large part of that.
Right.
Whether that's sponsors, partners you bring with you, or in a lot of the cases anymore, it's family money that's just writing a check that's in hand.
Right.
And then another big player in free agency that had some news wrapped around him this week was our friend of the show, Bubba Wallace. So Andy Murstein, owner of Richard Petty Motorsports, came out and said that the offer that Richard Petty Motorsports presented Bubba was a part ownership of the team.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's interesting. I don't think that's ever been done before. I don't recall.
Well, I mean, so
besides maybe Gene Haas.
Jeff Gordon.
Yeah.
Gene Haas. I think that there's been driver owners over the years, whether they had their own operation or they're, had a piece of it. But honestly, I mean, I think that Bubba, if I were Bubba, just from me knowing on the surface what everybody else knows, I don't know anything too special, but if Bubba was a consideration for the 42 car, like Adam Stern reported, it's probably because of sponsorship for the most part. The McDonald's connection, that 42 team, needs sponsorship for next year. I don't know if their partners are all locked in, so they need something to kind of tie that knot, right? And Bubba is a really good driver, and I think that he's an attractive driver for any team. But I think that sponsorship is going to be what gets him to the finish line in the 48 or the 42, or any of one of those marquee rides. And really that's only those rides could potentially only live as long as that sponsorship lives.
Yeah.
If he's getting a pay raise offer from Murstein and a stake in the team, if I'm Bubba, I want to take that deal for the sole purpose that, like, you've got a guy over here that wants you no matter what, that knows that, he wants to build his business, right? He's willing to risk his whole company around you. I mean, we all know that the 43 probably doesn't have any sponsorship signed for next year because they haven't announced anything.
Right.
But yet, you have a car owner that's willing to say, hey, I'm going to risk my business on you and build this around you. So if I'm Bubba, I'm taking a serious look at that. I mean, that's, to me, that's just the chemistry that I look for as a driver,
Yep.
Instead of chasing the greener grass or the perceived better equipment.
Yes.
The other thing too, is I think the long run of the business is going to come the way of teams like the 43 car. So, if we truly can get to this point where we're running single source manufactured race cars, where we're not developing, designing, manufacturing cars anymore, from a performance perspective, the obvious allure to going to one of those bigger organizations may not be as big as it is today.
Yeah.
They're still going to have the best talent, the best people. They have the best B2B relationships, the best manufacturer support. But you might be able to, if Bubba owns 10% of RPM and the way he drives and the way he runs, if the cars are equal, him and his team that work really well together, they'll click off a win every once in a while instead of clicking off top 10s every once in a while.
Yeah. If the thought of this Gen 7 car, or the what do we call it, next gen car,
Yeah,
actually comes to fruition as they hope,
mm-hmm.
With the single source manufacturer, you don't have to have a truck arm engineer and a KNC rig each and every week to see where chassis stipulations are, and it would be a little bit of a bet. It would be Bubba betting on himself on the long run, I think, if he stayed at RPM, just because, to Landon's point, that would be Merstein taking a bet with building his business solely around Daryl Wallace Jr.
Mm-hmm.
But there's lots of companies interested. You see the Cash App getting into the sport. Companies like that, I'm sure that a guy like Bubba is really enticing for companies to jump into the sport that never have before, because his social media followings are growing like crazy,
mm-hmm.
and for the obvious other things that he's been tied up around in the sport. He's probably the most recognizable face in NASCAR right now.
I just think if you're looking at one of those if you're Bubba and you're looking at those big organizations, okay, so you need a sponsorship to drive those deals, but do you have the manufacturer support behind you if you go there? Like, is Toyota going to pump $20 million into your program like they do Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch's, or however much it is?
Yep.
And I'm sure all those manufacturers love him, but I don't see one that's jumping up and down saying, hey, we're going to give Bubba the full treatment if he comes over here.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, the deals probably would have been done by now.
Yeah.
So, that's where I think that, and it's smart of Merstein to say, look, this is how I need to keep the guy.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to offer.
And if you got it, might as well give it to him. What would you do, Lauren?
If you were Bubba? If you were Merstein?
If I were a race
you were
car
Bubba.
driver.
Yeah.
Well, I think probably a big factor, like the 48 team would be 5 years ago. Like, I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, idealization, I guess. I don't really know the right word, but like, I guess like romanticizing what the 48 was 5 years ago as opposed to now. Is the 48 really that big of a step up at this point compared to the 43 car? I mean, Petty Wallace Racing, Petty Wallace Motorsports, that doesn't sound too bad.
Got a nice ring to it.
I would consider that.
But I think the major factor of somebody like Daryl's choice and where he goes is the future of the sport. If the sport does come back from, having to spend $8 million a year on a Toyota Alliance or a Gibbs Alliance to be competitive, if you don't have to have that and everybody has to buy their cars at the same spot, buy their spindles at the same spot, well, then you're not looking at that discrepancy of equipment or the disparity of equipment. Mm-hmm. And hypothetically, if I'm Bubba, I would probably be looking really serious at that 43 offer as well. And I mean, I'm sure that if that 42 McDonald's car is laid out, that probably looks like a nice green lawn that he just has to jump over the fence and take control of it. But would it be the great long play? I guess we're gonna find out.
Well, and I'm not really that ingrained in all of this, but does more sponsorship not potentially mean better equipment at the 43? I mean, so
it certainly would. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a lame duck year next year.
Not much is going to happen next year because you're not developing your cars anymore. In fact, I mean, you would know better than me, but I think at some point pretty soon the teams have to submit their chassis and everything for next year. So
I'm not sure what that date is, but you can't develop any new types of suspension pieces or anything really. It was locked in March, from what I believe, and from that March
they could upgrade
date,
their engine program somehow, probably.
Yeah.
If that is still an option for them, but and people, I mean, if there's better people on the market that they want to add to their program, they could definitely do that. But hopefully with this next gen car, the focus can be on the people, because really that's where we get the the ROI. I mean, that's where this our viewers and that's what the people look for is personalities and content. I'd love to see a NASCAR where our pit crew members are superstars and our crew chiefs are superstars, and they're all highlighted, not these cars, because we don't get a return on the investment that we put into 3D printing
left side spot mirrors,
left
stuff
side
like
spot
that.
mirrors and CNCing spindles out of a block of steel. It's that we don't get a return on that investment. We could, our sport maybe could in a way, but I just don't think there's a market for that right now, and that all that technology ends up proprietary. So you're asking, a company to invest millions of dollars into your program, and you're going to take that millions of dollars. I mean, if that company is selling hand soap, you're like, how are you going to invest our company or our money?
Yeah.
Well, let me just tell you how we're going to invest it. We're going to spend it on
radiators.
How does that sell more hand soap?
And fuel pumps.
Right.
And how does that sell more hand soap? You're not going to put me in a hospitality tent outside the track and so I can start giving free samples of soap? No, can't afford it. I spent on a right front spindle.
Right.
But yeah, the sport
But that's the blue sky that the sport has right now. Is that we're getting away from that.
Yeah, and I unfortunately those sorts of obstacles aren't jumped over overnight. But I think generally speaking, the sport as a whole, especially Phelps, understands that where the sport needs to be in 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big jump. There was a lot of heat from the fan base and probably even the teams of asking why NASCAR's completely throwing out the cars that they've had since 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because the progression of the sport isn't the right direction on the technology side. It needs to be wrangled in a little bit and at least have some sort of cap to it. And I think they're looking at that. But
there's some things that have gone. It's interesting to me though. Like this might be a solution to something that just kind of spiraled out of control, because there could be a place for having cars that are developed the way we develop cars. But the thing about 1985 was these teams that went to the racetrack, they didn't, they weren't individually their own manufacturing companies back then, right? There were independent manufacturing companies that were building race cars. So if if Banjo Matthews was building the baddest race cars out there and you had to run a Banjo Matthews race car to win,
you go buy one.
You went and bought one. And the thing is, Banjo Matthews ran his own business, and he would, if his cars were fast, he would sell them to anybody that bought them.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it wasn't until those guys were bought out by the individual organizations,
right,
and the individual organizations became the manufacturing companies to build race cars. And now what you have is an organization that has the baddest race cars, that wins all the races, and they're not going to just sell that same equipment for the same price that they're paying for it to their own competitors. They could hold back technology that they sell to their competitors and mark it up.
Yeah.
So it like creates this hierarchy, and that just killed the upward mobility for
mid-tier
teams, because that level of equipment was not accessible like it had been decades before.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I think that those organizations that sort of hold the keys to all the technology, they're the ones, they end up attracting all the sponsorship. They attract, and actually even more so than sponsorship, but they attract the manufacturer support, right? So then now the manufacturers subsidize those organizations because that's who they want to support. And like how any other subsidy works, it just drives up the cost.
Yeah.
And so, you have a manufacturer that's just pumping money into an organization to develop technologies, and it just drives up the cost for the mid-tier teams, but it also drives up the cost for the sponsors, right? Because now you have sponsors for mid-tier teams that they might be a really compelling sponsor, but they can't justify spending $70 million a year. They can justify maybe $5 million, $10 million,
and then get 2 races.
But then they only get 2 races.
But then and they can't show an ROI, then they never come back again.
Right.
And then they run out of sport, and that's what we don't need to happen. We need more companies to come in the sport see the value, and then continue to spend more and more money and activate with the fan base.
Clutch Coffee Bar in Mooresville, North Carolina is redefining the drive-thru coffee game in Race City, USA. The Clutch experience is fast, friendly, and delicious. Clutch Coffee Bar offers signature lattes and mochas, custom-flavored infused energy drinks, smoothies, and more. You can also order our signature Clutch coffee beans online and have them shipped directly to you. Go to clutchcoffeebar.com or visit our 2 locations in Mooresville, 356 Williamson Road and 154 West Plaza Drive. Power up today with Clutch Coffee Bar.
But one more free agent thing before I wanted to move on. Jimmy Johnson and the 48 car. Jimmy tested at IndyCar.
Yeah.
Seemed to have a lot of fun at Indy. I don't think anybody else drove that car. Did you follow it very close?
I didn't. I think he was a couple, maybe like 2 seconds off race pace.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I heard that the track was green and tire degradation was pretty bad.
It's hard to really compare.
Yeah, they said it was hard to compare, but I would imagine.
I mean, if I was 2 seconds off race pace, I'd be pretty thrilled.
I'd be popping champagne bottles. Well, I mean, I think Scott Dixon, he was there, but I think he was about 2 seconds faster in the field too. So that Jimmy actually might be right on par with the 5th place guy, and Scott Dixon's out on his own island. I think that I don't want to bang on Jimmy. He's had a couple tough weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Had another tough week. Got in a little altercation with the 14, and then he gets on there and asks if the 14 had a spotter. Now, I think anybody that listens to any sort of NASCAR podcast knows who Clint Boyer's spotter is because he's very proud to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Brett Griffin from Door Bumper Clear podcast. So
little podcast rivalry, I guess.
Yeah, not really. We've never had a DBC Sunday Money podcast. We've had some podcast beefs back in the day, but we have since grilled that beef and ate it.
Yeah, they don't exist anymore. That other one.
I don't think they do. Only for special events they come back out.
Right. Yep.
But so naturally, the rabble South Park mob, I always like to use that little gif with all the people with pitchforks and the torches. Like they just look for the next best thing to just get on Twitter and talk crap to. They all start directing their hate to Brett Griffin. And Brett Griffin is not scared to clap back at some fans.
No.
So he was an interesting follow for me last night on the plane, waiting to take off. Brett Griffin was standing up for himself. In my opinion, looking at that, I watched that replay a couple times. It looked like Jimmy kind of stuck his nose in a hole where it didn't belong. I didn't show Landon before the.
I saw it.
Oh, you saw it?
Yeah.
No, what was your opinion on
He
it?
stuck his nose somewhere it didn't belong.
Yeah.
You're not gonna make a pass in the middle of the corner in New Hampshire.
No.
Like I guess the only thing that's maybe tactical about that move is if because the way the traction compound is on the bottom groove and on the top groove and then the middle is sort of like no man's land, by squirting next to the 14 in the middle of the corner, you could potentially take away his line to where he's stuck in that middle groove and now you're on the traction compound. So tactically that's actually a good move, but it was too far around the corner for that to work anyways.
Yeah.
It was almost just like a Hail Mary.
It was a little bit of a Hail Mary. It didn't work.
Was it going to work?
And I feel like Jimmy tried to throw a couple Hail Marys.
And there's a
Marys
really
this
good bump
year.
right there off it too, that like if you got the wheels cut and you're in the gas, it's definitely
you get out of shape. Absolutely. That's the bump right over the tunnel. Shout out to the PJ1 applicators this week. I thought they did a pretty good job. The PJ1 wore out from the middle groove or the top groove.
Definitely made
its
the
way
racing
down.
better at New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, for sure. But what about the 48 car? I don't know. Is there any candidates that stick out to you who should be getting in that ride? Like, I've been trying to think of every scenario. Whether Eric Jones doesn't resign with Gibbs and they take him over to the 48, I feel like they need a veteran guy over there. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, nothing stands out.
Then you hear rumors.
And there's nothing really emerging either.
No.
Leaders. I mean, maybe the rumor of them cutting a car makes more sense.
That's the latest rumor.
I'd have to. I feel like those teams, like those manufacturer supported teams, get paid per car. So I'd be interesting to see like how they sort that out with Chevy. Could you imagine being Hendrick and calling Chevy and saying, "Hey, we want to cut a car," and Chevy saying, "Okay, well, here's how much we're going to cut out of what we pay you."
Yeah, we're cutting 25% of your budget.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, it is interesting that nobody's really, especially with the Brad conversation kind of dying down a little bit at Hendrick. There's nobody that's really emerged.
I know, it's kind of weird.
How many like open cars do you anticipate, I guess, next year? Like with maybe guys retiring that aren't Jimmy Johnson or calling it quit?
Hard to say. I mean, and none of them are really open per se. Like everybody, it's musical chairs because there's essentially the seats are open and it's everybody running around trying to grab their seat when the music stops.
Right.
And
as sponsorship has gotten harder to come by over the last 5 or 6 years, because it seems like every year the silly season is crazier than the last, and I think a lot of that is a result of these sponsorships that used to be 3-year deals are now like 1-year deals, and so these drivers that used to get 2, 3, 4-year deals are all getting 1-year deals, and it's just got to the point where now on every season, every driver and every sponsor is on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
And there's so many decision makers involved when you have a sponsor and a driver and a team owner all on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
And they're just, even for one organization to make a decision, there's a lot of decision makers involved. So then when you add like 6 other organizations that are in the same situation, it's a very complex, there's a lot of complex things. I mean, I wouldn't want to bother myself being a media member in this day and age, because you can chase stories and chase the scoop that you think you have it. You could literally talk to the general manager of a team and think that that they could be your source, and you could think that that's the case, but I mean, it could change on a moment's notice.
Absolutely. It's not like a clear picture, and there's not a drivers union like when you can't ask to get traded like any other particular sport. You can't ask to re-up a negotiation because there's only one seat on the team. There's not 52 players with one guy can sit on the bench and still get paid. You're the one guy, the public face for your race team, and there's also another 4 guys behind you waiting in line to be that public face if you slip up or wanted to do something else. So it's free agency. Like it keeps getting harder and harder every year because there's more factors and more variables that play into the conversations. But I didn't want to leave. I feel like I kind of bashed JJ a little bit, and I don't want to do that. So I want to bring up some positive notes on Jimmy Johnson. So NASCAR sent a survey to the drivers last week that I think it had 5 questions. You had to fill them out. There wasn't multiple choice. There was a little blank box, and it says, "Who's the greatest driver of all time?" You fill out the box. Who's the best active driver? Who's the best crew chief? Who's your choice to win the championship? And who gets the most consistent performance out of their equipment? Those were the questions. There might be 1 or 2 more, but I forget. So the results came out on NASCAR NBC, all posted it. And the drivers collectively, I think 37%, what was the percentage of drivers that agreed that Jimmy Johnson is the greatest driver of all time?
Wow.
Is that a surprise to you?
No, I mean, I think that's been my opinion.
So you'd have filled in Jimmy Johnson?
I
filled Jimmy Johnson in too. Who would you have filled in?
Boy, I have no clue.
I mean, David Pearson got some votes.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know who didn't make the list? Jeffrey Gordon.
He didn't make the top
That
5.
was
See, so I mean, I think that Jeff could probably, maybe fit into his own pocket of like the most impactful driver of all time or something like that.
Absolutely agree.
And Jeff, to be the greatest of all time, Jeff is in this awkward in between Jimmy and Dale Earnhardt, right? Like, or Richard Petty, because Dale and Richard are kind of this old world greatest of all time, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then Jeff is new world, but then Jimmy won more championships.
Yeah.
Right. So like Jimmy, I think that's where Jeff almost could totally get bypassed or overlooked, at least in those 3. And then I know that he didn't even make the top 5. So I think that's where he could get overlooked there. But I mean, I think it's without argument that Jeff is probably one of the most impactful drivers for this entire sport.
I don't even think that's an argument. at all.
Yeah.
I think he is the most impactful guy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
And on the flip side, like Jimmy is probably nowhere on that list in terms of impactful. You know, it's Jimmy's cultural influence has been a slow and steady climb, and I think he's as powerful as ever right now, because you can pretty much mention to anybody and ask about who Jimmy Johnson is, and they know. But I mean, Jeff Gordon, almost transcended the sport on his back for a decade.
the guy did Saturday Night Live.
Right.
Right?
Ain't no drivers doing Saturday Night Live.
Right.
Maybe ever again. Like everybody's like, "Oh, what's
Right.
NASCAR?" Maybe actually, I could see
I
Bubba
could see
doing it.
Bubba.
Yeah.
Bubba might be on Saturday Night Live one day. Keep going, Bubba. You'll be on Saturday Night Live. And then the other guys. So the drivers the percentage of drivers voted that Kyle Busch is the best active driver.
Mm-hmm.
I think that seems fairly obvious with how dominant he is in the lower divisions as well. 2020 is having a year though.
Yeah.
He is not having a good year. Hasn't won yet.
I think I might have wrote Kevin Harvick into that one.
He is rock solid. So,
But I mean, just pure driving talent. I mean, Kyle Busch is
yeah,
pretty hard to beat.
I think by every measurement you can put Kyle Busch up there for sure. And then so Kevin Harvick did win the vote of consistently getting the most performance out of their equipment, and then Rodney Childers, his crew chief, was voted on as probably the best active crew chief.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was an interesting survey. I hope the fans
What was
enjoyed
the
that.
point of that? Like, just
I don't
So
know.
we could talk about it on Sunday Money.
Yeah, I
Right.
figured.
Right, so they can post a poll on social media and get
Right.
some sort
Peer
of
review.
reaction
All right.
from the
okay.
fan base. Let's take a break, gather our thoughts here, and we'll come back.
Citywide to countryside. Whatever you drive, wherever you go, Hercules Tires has the value, selection, and industry-leading warranty to get you there, no matter where the road takes you. Go to HerculesTire.com. There you can find the nearest authorized Hercules retail location to you. Plus, you can use the Tire Tracker to find out which Hercules tire fits your vehicle the best. That's HerculesTire.com. Hercules Tires. Ride on our strength.
And we're back. But first, we got to read this O'Reilly's. We got to give them a shout out.
Give it.
You gotta get paid, man.
Yeah. Think O'Reilly Auto Parts for all your car care needs. We're close, convenient, and known for our guaranteed everyday low prices and excellent customer service from professional parts people you can trust. Stop by your local O'Reilly Auto Parts today. O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day.
Wow, that was great.
Now we're back. So when I bumped into Landon yesterday morning, we had a pretty good conversation about this the driver approval topic. It's not like a dead horse now because it's only a couple weeks old, but I feel like everybody's kind of talked about it a little bit. But I always like talking to Landon because, like I said in break, his IQ score is about 100 points higher than mine. So I always like to know the educated version of an opinion versus mine, just like kind of wing it.
Right.
So, and naturally, the conversation sparked back up. For those who don't remember, the incident at Texas with Quinn, who was on the show a couple weeks ago, who obviously Landon has some sort of attachment to because there was some Quinn drives the car that Landon drove last year, and there was some dealings there. So I wanted obviously to get his opinion on that, but also, like, if he was in charge, if Landon was in charge for a day, what does driver qualifications to be a cup driver look like? And he had a very interesting answer. That's why I had the listeners here.
Okay.
Well, I think that it's interesting to maybe think about, like, how did we get here? You know, because there used to be some qualification requirements, and I think that NASCAR still, makes drivers and teams submit resumes, things like that. I think to review that stuff. But it's interesting to me that, like, the qualification to be a cup driver 5 years ago or and beyond that was kind of a self policed process because the cars themselves weren't locked into the race, right? So the teams were not incentivized to just take anybody off the street that had money.
Great point.
Because you
wouldn't make the race.
Yeah, you go to the Daytona 500, there's 50 cars, right? Actually, it didn't even matter. There's not 50 cars this year, but even when there was 45 cars some years to go to Daytona,
Yeah.
It wasn't worth taking $100,000 from someone if they were going to miss the race.
Yeah.
It would ruin your whole year. Those first 3 races were what determined, how well you were locked into the field.
And Daytona might not be the best example because you have the qualifying races that you can race for win. Even a race like Richmond, I was watching a race back from Richmond, or qualifying back from Richmond, and there was
You had to make
47 cars going for 43 spots.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no scrubs in the field.
No.
Because if you were a guy like Mike Hillman Sr., for example, owned a Cup car, he knew when y'all unloaded, you guys were in Q trim, right?
Yeah.
Or when Michael McDowell was driving for Phil Parsons, they were in full-blown Q trim because they knew they had to make it in the show.
Yep.
You couldn't put a guy that was
Q trim.
3/10 off. You couldn't put a guy that was 3/10 off, take his $25,000, go to Richmond, and pray to God you made the race.
Right.
Now, 36 cars with a charter system are locked into the race, and we run 40, so we only get 37, 38 cars because the back end of the field isn't worth the purse money. So that's the factors that have all played into where we're at right now.
Yeah, I mean, and you can even look at the open cars. Like, the same logic applies. If you just look at the Daytona 500, right, the most important race that it takes, you have to qualify in every year. The open car field tends to have better drivers in it than, like, the bottom 3 or 4 of those charter cars, because those charter teams that, there's really there's nothing holding them accountable for who they put in their car. Those open teams, there is, because they got to make the race.
Yeah.
That's the car that J.J. Yaley ends up driving. These guys that have experience.
Yeah, Ross even.
Have had to race their way in. So, it used to be self-police, like we said, but NASCAR still had a process back then to get your license, and I think that process is still in place, but I think that there's just more tension on that process now because of the way these teams are incentivized. And so now your question is, well, does NASCAR just need to turn up that process and create like this barrier of entry? Because the barrier of entry to get into the Cup Series from a driver kind of went down as a result of that.
Yeah.
Now it comes down to money. So, from a driver perspective, I especially an experienced driver, then I can biased or even unbiased. I can make plenty of unbiased arguments for it, but like you could definitely say, like, look at how iRacing qualifies their drivers to get to the next license, right? You have to have a safety rating where you can race so many races without incidents, so many laps without incidents. There's an iRating system where you get points per, position that you finish in, and it's kind of based on the strength of field. We kind of have all that technology in NASCAR to know how many incidents drivers are involved in, and maybe the strength of each field and where we finish compared to your equipment, or the historical performance of your equipment if you're outkicking your coverage or whatever it might be. It would be cool to see NASCAR sort of create a system that maybe qualifies the drivers just purely on that performance, and their ability to get through races without wrecking, objectively and not subjectively.
Right.
I think the challenge with that is just like, well, who's incentivized and who's going to push that ahead? The teams aren't incentivized to push that ahead. And I think that NASCAR could be incentivized to push that ahead, but NASCAR would really have to be looking long term for themselves to say, look, we need to improve the driver talent in our fields. Otherwise, like I said earlier, it's going to drive down the personalities, and it's just going to drive down the overall quality of the whole sport. So we've got to have better people here. So NASCAR could have that outlook, but there's NASCAR and the teams work closer together than ever before right now, and the drivers don't really have a unified voice in that. And I think the drivers would be the number one voice to say, look, we want to create sort of a barrier of entry to each level, the Truck Series, Xfinity, and the Cup Series. I just don't know how you would execute that.
I'm not so sure either, and that's way above my pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
But NASCAR also has a lot bigger fish to fry too. I think that they keep hearing about this driver approval process, and they're like, yeah, we're trying to like figure out how to not get our entire garage infected with COVID. We'll deal with that.
We got TV deals. We
Yeah.
we got everything to work through.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, we could sit here. To me, there's some fun conversations to have because, they could have big long-term effects on the industry, and even if they're just ideas, maybe it's an idea that's revisited 5 years from now, or maybe it's something where when all the equipment is equal, the teams have an opportunity or have incentive to put a good driver in their car, because if they go to put a good driver in their car, they can run top 10.
Yeah.
And if they can run top 10, they can get a sponsor. I guess that's one of the hard parts, going back to the manufacturer discussions of manufacturing your own cars. Like these small teams, they're locked in the race, and then also without $20 million, they're not going to win.
Yeah.
So,
or even run top 15.
Or even top 15. So why would I spend, $500,000 on a pro driver when, I can
somebody's going to bring me $500,000 and they drive for free.
Right. Somebody's going to bring me $500,000. They're going to drive for free, and I'm going to finish within 3 spots.
Yeah.
Of where I would have with the pro driver.
Yeah. So it's not as easy as just like drawing up a sheet of paper. Like these are the boxes you have to check to be a cup driver. And then you bang the gavel and then it's done.
Right.
Everything is intertwined, and there's obviously money involved and teams are involved. And
right.
Like
these team owners got to survive
entangled.
too. I mean, it's not their fault. They're just playing the game that's structured.
Right. I mean, you got to play the game to what the rules
Right.
are set.
Right.
So I wanted to shift a little bit because you had a tweet last week that I was interested to see what the result came. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming you and Joey Denowitz were having a conversation, and you put the tweet out for everybody to chip in on
We're
what they're
debating. Yeah, we
you
were
were
having a
deba-
debate.
The debate was what?
I'm trying to remember now. It was the question was what was the driving force for NASCAR's growth? What was it?
It was what was the main factor of the NASCAR boom. I think it was the 70s in your tweet, but
so I got one of the first responses I got out of the tweets that I got the wrong time period. Totally fair. I think okay, so the tweet was like, what was the driving factors, or what were the main contributors to NASCAR being able to boom to a huge audience?
So obviously you and Joey had two different opinions on this.
Yes.
Which were?
Well, so what I was exploring was, I wanted to explore the idea that the cars in the 70s and 80s, even though that isn't necessarily when NASCAR skyrocketed, it skyrocketed more in the 90s, I felt like the foundation of our sport, Bill France building a sport where the cars were identifiable with actual manufacturer supplied cars to a mass audience, that's what laid the groundwork for this sport to be identifiable to hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah.
Because you drive a car and you drive a car and I drive a car. We all drive cars on the road. So that in itself was like an instant, more scalable audience than creating. If Bill France would have said, I'm going to create a race car.
Yeah, IndyCar.
Right, an IndyCar. Yeah, or something. I'm going to create something. It's going to look like this. It's going to have a cage. It's going to have tires. And actually, I think one of the examples I used with Joey was sprint car racing, where I was just like, sprint car racing is arguably one of the purest forms of motorsport. It's one of the most entertaining forms of motorsport. But the cars don't serve a purpose,
right?
And they race on a track that doesn't serve a purpose. I mean, it's a dirt track, and yeah, you use different shapes and different banks, but like, gosh, if you're trying to make a car go fast, I wouldn't really put it on a quarter-mile dirt oval. I'd put it on an asphalt track,
you put it at Talladega.
Yeah, so I think that like my sort of original theory was that NASCAR being like not NASCAR but stock car racing, stock car meaning a car, buying a car off a car lot and then seeing how fast you can take it. That's just what was a scalable model.
I
right?
agree with that. Now, what was the contradicting point?
The contradicting point from Joey's side was just that's there's just so many more factors, that there's personalities involved and Winston pumping money into the sport and then TV deals, and that's what attracted the big audiences. But my argument wasn't that that's wrong. Of course that's what ultimately put the sport in front of those big audiences. My argument is that like that model of having a stock car that's identifiable with 100 million people was the hook, was one of the hooks.
Yeah.
That where people could turn on TV and be like, "What? I got one of those in the garage."
Yeah. Yeah.
How are they doing that?
And
It's the personalities that make it good, that ultimately.
And I was gonna say, if you're making a banana split, right? Every ingredient separate is good, right? You
Right.
got the peanuts, you got the banana, you got the ice cream. Like the foundation of it, to your point, is the relatability between driving a 1988 Chevy Monte Carlo and Dale Earnhardt is driving the
Right.
same
Right.
Chevy Monte Carlo.
Or sprint car racing, to me, or dirt track racing, even if it's dirt late model racing, the racing is just as good, if not better at times.
Yeah.
The personalities are just as good, if not better at times.
Yeah. 'Cause
But
there's more of them.
But it's almost like to me, it's not identifiable with a mass audience because the cars and the tracks are not identifiable. But anybody can look at a road, with dash marks on it, and a stock car that came from in the 70s, it came from the factory.
Yeah.
And say, wow, that's
Yes.
crazy. I got to see this.
Yeah.
I got to go to Talladega and see how they make that Challenger go
Yeah.
that fast.
And
Charge.
and
whatever it
obviously that's shifted some in the last 20 years.
Right.
And you're not going to walk outside and see a dirt late model going down the highway, right?
Right.
But you're also not going to go look at a Ford Mustang and look at it on TV on Sunday and be like, "Ooh, look, that looks like the same thing."
Right.
Beyond a decal kit, it really doesn't.
Right.
So what do you think? Do you think that what you can maybe consider a decline of TV numbers or overall audience at the track? Do you think that that's relative to the cars not looking similar to the OEMs anymore?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think it probably contributes to the limited number of OEMs that are interested in the sport.
Yeah.
Because, you take a company like Volkswagen who sells a lot of cars in the United States, and they probably look at a NASCAR race car and be like, well, other than the marketing, just the pure branding from it, the media exposure, there's no real reason for us to build one of these cars, right? And so if they're, so now the question is, well, it's still interesting from a media exposure, if I can have a Volkswagen Victory Lane, that's worth X amount of dollars. But then when they find out what Toyota is spending to
Hundreds of millions
of dollars to get to Victory Lane, they probably can't justify it.
Right.
And I think the Toyota, they obviously they're huge, and they can justify a lot of the media exposure, and they also, they invest pretty heavily in TRD. So I think there might be some technology there that Toyota is invested in. Obviously rolling out a Supra last year and then putting one on the track at the same time. I mean, that's something they're interested in. But for maybe for Volkswagen, they might say, well, hey, if we could bring in diesel engine to NASCAR, we'd be interested. Or if we can, use the platform to develop these components, then it would justify spending $100 million.
Right. Or if the entry price was as low as developing a body to put on a single manufactured chassis,
right,
and you offer the team some support just to be the Volkswagen manufacturer team,
right,
then that's a little bit more enticing, as
right.
opposed to trying to figure out how to spend 200 hours in
Right.
wind tunnel or develop a CFD to figure out how to
Right.
make your car go fast in a circle.
But when, so like I guess over the last couple of decades, as manufacturers have backed out, but then the ones that stayed sort of, centralized their support in single organizations, and then basically empower those organizations to be the manufacturers for all race cars and developers of all racing technology. That's where we kind of created this like hierarchy that we talked about, so now, and to me, it's like, I look at these small teams, and it's challenging for those small teams because they, you can run any sponsor you want on the car, right? And it's just a matter of going out and getting that sponsorship. But you don't have a choice when it comes to manufacturer. I mean, you have to, it's a Ford or a Chevy or a Toyota, you have to run one of those, and you have to advertise for them. You have to run their decals on the car. and you have to, have the driver has to have it on the suit. Those are the rules if you want to run one of those cars. But they don't have to pay you for that.
Yeah.
So like, these small teams are sort of like, the manufacturers can choose who they want to support, but the teams don't get to choose whether or not to run those manufacturers' markings, I guess.
Because they don't have any option.
Right.
Unless you want to pay, a lot of money for a Toyota affiliation or Roush Penske affiliation.
Right.
Like it's all the hierarchy of how much you want to pay.
Right.
What's the cheapest engine deal I could find to
Right.
be on the racetrack to collect the purse money in the back end? Like
Right.
that's more or less the equation. But I feel like we've been rambling on for an hour. This has been a great
It's fun.
conversation. We do have to give a clutch performer of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Who do we think that is? Who do you think performed the best and earned a clutch performer? I mean, this is a very valuable honor.
Right.
I mean, Casey LaJoy got it for getting married last week. So,
Yeah.
like,
There you go.
the bar.
There's
no,
our.
no, he got it
He
last
Oh,
week.
he got it last week.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he got it last week.
Yeah.
So we have to find somebody that can
Right.
meet
No,
that bar.
no one had a. Oh well, I was gonna say nobody had a baby this week, but
Yeah.
Chad Canals they had a baby.
What's it
they
last
did.
week?
Who else? They had this past week.
I
Right?
feel like this week was a long week because we race on Thursday. So we,
Oh right. It's
we
been a
had
while.
10 days.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Brad won the race.
Yeah, we can just give it to Brad.
Yeah.
Because
mean,
clutch is like right down
by
the street from.
default.
Yeah, by default.
We
Because
could give it to Steve Phelps for pulling it off with the governor for getting us to.
that's
Oh,
a good
true.
one.
Go race
I
in
mean,
New
I
Hampshire.
feel like we have given it to Steve though once.
Maybe.
But I'm sure Steve is working tireless hours. So he might need a clutch coffee. So we're going to give the clutch
He
performer.
probably needs a clutch coffee.
Steve Phelps, you are clutch performer of the week. We'll give it to Brad too. Brad, stop by clutch coffee bar.
Tell them who
in
you are.
Mooresville. They well
They'll
when
give
you
you free coffee.
when you roll up in your Tesla, I'm sure they probably know who you are. When
Yeah.
you're on the way to Penske to do your speech to congratulate the whole team this week, stop by Clutch because it is brought to you by Clutch Coffee Bar in Mooresville, North Carolina. You can order Clutch Coffee beans online and have them shipped directly to you. Go to clutchcoffeebar.com.
This reminds me of something that I've been rooting for here for the last couple months is a free mattress. And I heard that you got a free mattress, Corey.
We did from Lisa,
Son of
Leesa. Now, I'll be honest, the verdict's still out if the
I've
wife
heard.
likes it.
I've heard.
Hopefully we can get used to it because it doesn't matter if you sleep on the most uncomfortable mattress of all time for 5 years. Like, if you get another one, you think that last mattress you had was the
That
most
was the
comfortable
best.
thing of all time. So I think we're giving it a couple days to try it out. They sent some pillows which are super comfy. In my opinion, the bed is super comfy. I like a stiffer bed. Kelly
Mhm.
likes a soft bed that like you kind of
It's all
fall in like
to me.
a
It's
pillow.
Right.
Yeah, I'm kind of that way. It's all about the bedding, man. You need
Oh.
The sheets.
the comforters and the pillow tops. all that
Yeah,
stuff.
you got. So they sent us the whole gamut.
Yeah, I mean, that's
So
the most bullshit thing I've ever heard because that was my idea.
it was.
But whatever,
So
it's
we wanted to
fine.
thank Lisa Bedding. They're follow them on social media. In my opinion, the bed,
Not me.
the
I
bed-
didn't get a bed, so
The bed sleeps great. The verdict's still out for the wife. If I got to take a hammer and like soften that thing up on her side a little bit, maybe we'll see what we can do. But
right.
Landon's going vacation to the beach. His family's already down there. He just happened to stop in on the way down there.
Oh,
Nice
that's
enough guy.
nice.
Where are you going?
Hilton Head.
How long are you going for?
A couple days, then I'll be back.
Or
flying to
Michigan. Yeah.
Yep.
You
I
guys
guess-
flying up Friday night?
Got some house stuff to do though. I realized last week my house is not keeping cool, and so I went up in the attic and it was like 140 degrees. Not 100 degrees, 140 degrees, which we know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so I started Googling and I realized that you're not, your attic should only be like 10 degrees hotter than outside. And I looked up in the roof and the attic exhaust fans are not running.
Mm.
And so did some quick evaluation. They do have power to them. Tried to bypass the thermostat. That didn't work. So
Mm.
I ordered new fans. They come in today.
So maybe we can send over when Daryl gets back from vacation. Maybe we can.
Daryl could help you.
He seems
He'll-
like a hands-on.
No, I'm doing it
ki-
today. I'm getting it done. I'm getting it done. I need a tall ladder. I got to climb up there and with a little headlamp on. And
Oh man.
Okay.
We'll be
well,
good to go.
Minor Landon.
140 degree attic. Wish me luck.
Good
Good
luck.
luck.
Check in on
Be-
me later. Make sure I didn't fall off
Yeah.
a ladder and
I will.
heat exhaustion.
Man, I hate we didn't get to talk about iRacing and stuff. You were the E-Humpy Wheeler, but I don't want to get down that tangent. We'll just have you on for another day and talk about that.
Let's do it.
Appreciate the time, buddy. And talk to y'all next week. Thanks for listening.